Communication and Technology, the Honorable Mr. Charles Mok, Legislative Councillor, Mr. Chester Song, Chairman, Internet Society Hong Kong, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is indeed a great pleasure to be with you all to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Internet Society Hong Kong. This year, the ISOCHK also hosts the Asia Internet Symposium in Hong Kong with the title, Sharing Our Lives with Internet of Things, the Angels and the Devils. First of all, let me assure you that Hong Kong remains one of the safest societies in the world, and the overall recorded crime dropped to the lowest level since 1979. In 2015, there were 909 crimes per 100,000 population, a very favorable figure when compared with other metropolitan cities, including Paris, London, Toronto, New York, Tokyo, and Singapore. As regards Internet security, the Cyber Security and Technology Crime Bureau is a founding member of the Interpol Eurasian Working Group on Cybercrime for Heads of Units since its establishment in 2013 and has been chairing its meeting since 2015. In order to keep Hong Kong safe, amongst others, the Hong Kong Police obtained approval of the Finance Committee of the Legislative Council in May 2016 to secure funding of 397 million and 855 million for two major initiatives under the Force Information and Communication System Strategy Plan 2015 to 2020 to replace and upgrade information technology infrastructures and applications, and to replace the command and control communication system. Both initiatives are of immense scales and complexity. Both mega initiatives present opportunities and challenges for the force as a whole in improving our ICT infrastructure, applications, and services. To make both initiatives a success will require vigilance and huge effort from our internal and external partners. As Internet connectivity is no longer restricted to computers and smartphones, physical objects, for example, watches, parking meters, surveillance camera, and even home appliances such as refrigerator, washing machines, and kitchen devices, etc., are increasingly connected to the Internet. Such IoTs present immense potential application and threat in the field of law enforcement. That is why we have angels and devils in our presentation today. Most important of all, we should ensure that robust security measures are in place and personal privacy are respected and protected in adopting IoTs. Before ending, allow me to convey our thanks to the Chairman and members of ISOCHK for organizing the activities. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Lam. Please stay on stage. May I now invite our host and guests, Mr. Chester Song, Mr. Nicholas Yang, Mr. Honorable Charles Mok, and Mr. Edwin Lam to come up on stage again for a group photo. And also, may I now invite our keynote speakers, Mr. Fred Baker, Mr. Andrew Sullivan, Ms. Rebecca McKinnon, and Mr. Rob Nichol to come up on stage to join the group photo. Okay, thank you. Please remain on stage. Now I would also like to invite all other speakers, our EXCO members, and as well as our sponsors, representative from IBM, Ms. Cecilia Chow, and Mr. Elvin Young from ICO Group Limited, and our dear partners to come up on stage for another group photo. Thank you. Please be seated. Without further ado, let's invite our first keynote speaker, Mr. Fred Baker, former IETF chair and current co-chair of the IETF's IP version 6 Operations Working Group. He will now talk about security, the Internet of Things. Mr. Baker, please.
Okay, is that in the same tone? So the organizers, Fiona, SCU, and others, contacted me 2 months ago and asked if I would be interested to speak here. And I told them, well, you're talking about the Internet of Things. I'd like to talk a little bit about how to secure it. In the last couple of weeks, we've had a great case in point, and in an attack that has happened and taken really quite a few people offline. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about the concerns that I've had and the concerns that the technology community has had with security and IoT. But then point out that we were actually thinking about this before the attack happened. We've been thinking about it for quite some amount of time. So I'm going to look a little bit at the problems that we know are there in IoT and are there in the products, and then look at kind of what are the things that we should do, what are the building blocks of solutions to those problems. Now the issues that we've been experiencing, these are not new. We had a house that was built in Germany that was just a wonderful example of Internet of Things doing everything you could possibly imagine. And in the house, a light bulb blew out. It was an IoT light bulb, and it wound up DOSing the entire house and prevented the house from being able to do anything. And that was in 2012. That was one of the earliest examples of a security error in IoT. As I mentioned, in the last couple of weeks, we've had security attacks. There's another one that is, or DOS attacks. There's another one, I'm told, that is starting to be developed and starting to be seen on the net. And we have a variety of attacks in which IoT is engaged in surveillance. Now, that falls in two different categories. And one of them is things that are not designed for surveillance, but which are in fact doing that. And then the other things are actually designed for surveillance, being used for their primary function by people that we don't want to use them. And both of those are attacks on our privacy, on our personal security, and on, of course, the network involved in that. And I want to thump a little bit on this concept that IoT devices often are designed to engage in surveillance. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if I talk about home health care, I want to be able to monitor perhaps grandma who is in her apartment or her house, and I want to be able to keep her in her house and not move her to a home or whatever. I want to make life easy for her. And at the same time, I need to know whether she's okay. I need to know whether she's moving around the house, whether she fell down and can't get up, and those kinds of things. So as part of home health care, what I might do is put motion detectors or other kinds of surveillance in the house so that I can tell and so that she can communicate with her doctor and say, am I okay? She can call 911 by pushing a panic button. Is that 112 here? Call an emergency. I'm sorry? 999. Okay. Whatever works. So these devices are by definition engaged in surveillance. Now, if I've got something that can tell whether I'm home and what room I'm in, who is going to be very interested in that? Well, not only me and not only grandma's doctor, but a thief that is casing us would find that information very, very useful. But I want to make sure that people that are authorized to have access to it can get it. But I also want to protect that information and make sure that it's not accessible to people that it's not. And that now includes information that gets stored in the cloud. What's the cloud? It's a bunch of computers somewhere, a bunch of storage. And when we upload information, when we say, hey, Alexa, please do this for me, that information goes somewhere and it's stored, even if only momentarily, so that it can be acted on. And that could be very interesting if the service is hacked. And somebody now gets that information and says, oh my goodness, this guy's using Alexa and he's doing something with it. Okay, so when we talk about security, we're talking about the devices, we're talking about the systems that they're part of. We're also talking about the cloud behind them that is making inferences and doing things that perhaps we asked it to do. And so this slide is kind of out of order, I suppose, but I thought of this before, and we got that. I have a problem. I feel like we're fighting yesterday's battle. We have been dealing with this kind of issue in the internet since at least the early 1990s, if not before. And we've developed a number of technologies for that. And we have wound up not using them. If you look through the RFCs, the documents that describe how the internet is intended to work and so on and so forth, you'll find that every one of them has a security considerations section. And security considerations, when we first got into them, quite often read, I didn't think about it. This document doesn't address security. And so as former chair of the IETF, at the time, we would bring in the developer and sit him down and say, why did you say that? Why don't you go think about security and put something about it in here? And he said, and the developer would tell us, and I'm quoting people who have sat in front of me and said this, there is no market for security. People will not pay for a secure product. And as a result, I'm not going to spend my time and effort doing that. And well, my goodness, we're kind of reaping the result of that now. And guess what? Now there is a market for security. I think we're seeing the same thing in IoT. We're seeing the same thing that we saw on the internet 20 years ago now with IoT products. And we need to think about, really in many cases, the same classes of solutions that we put into the internet. Can we update the software and make sure that we've addressed the known attacks? Can we identify new things that are coming along? Can we actually manage the development of software according to best engineering practices, and so that we know what it is that we're delivering? We have really quite a number of problems in our software due to inattention. If I look at the consumer grade routers that we put in our homes, quite often what happens there is that somebody literally just goes to a manufacturer and says, I need another 100 bazillion of whatever that product is, please make me some, and so I can put them on store shelves and sell them. And they go grab some software off the net, and they put it in, and away they go. There's lack of continuity now between that device and the previous one. And how many products did I just describe? Probably described something in every one of our homes, and maybe many things in our homes. That's a problem. If you want to have good products out there, we need to develop them in a good way. We need to manage their software in a good way. And to add to that, in IoT, these devices are quite often very small. They might be the size of a button on your shirt. And they might not have much power to them. I've had people say, I don't need to build security into my device because it hasn't got the power it needs to execute it. And I find myself saying, maybe it hasn't got enough power. Maybe you have a deficient product. You should think about that. That should scare you. Okay? And this is really, I think, a concern. One of the things that we're seeing as a result, both the United States and the European Union have said that they're in the process of putting together, or they plan to promote security standards for IoT devices. We're looking at regulation. Now, to me as a technologist, that scares me to death because I don't think the regulators know what to regulate. But okay, they're saying, dear technologists, you haven't solved the problem, we're going to help you. Okay, and okay, we need to work with them on that. But that's an outcome. Now, thinking through security then for IoT, how do I think we should go about that? Like I say, I think a large part of what we should do is we should apply what we've already learned in the internet. And that will involve in part securing communications, and in part securing data, and in part looking at our manufacturing and our maintenance processes and making sure that we've actually got things going in a reasonable way. Now, securing communications, what does that mean? Do I mean encrypt your transfers, use HTTPS or something like that? That's part of it. That's part of it. But if I'm talking about data that got stored in the cloud and now the cloud got hacked, securing that data stream going back and forth using HTTPS isn't going to help because it's not involved, it's not there. Okay, the data is now up somewhere else. So I need to actually secure the data at rest. If I've got grandma and looking at her heart rate and asking about where she is in the house, I need to encrypt that information so that it's only accessible to the people that are authorized to have it. One interesting thing to look at, there's a new variant on the HTTP out there, the protocol used in the web called HTTP2. And that has the ability to carry a number of accesses in parallel inside it and then allow them to go to a variety of places. So it acts not only as an access methodology, but as a tunneling methodology. Now, if I know what servers I'm talking with, then I can kind of figure out some things about what is being looked at. If my data is going to a video server, a video storage unit, it's probably video. If it's going to a transaction responder, I'm probably making transactions of some kind. I can look at the servers that are involved and I can make inferences. If I can hide those inside an encrypting tunnel, which HTTP2 would give us, that gives me an extra layer of defense on that kind of information. But I think the big thing that I would look at in all this is what we call mutual authentication. Now, when I meet a person, I walk up to them and say, hi, I'm Fred. And they say, hi, I'm whoever they are. And I now know, at least to some degree, who that person is. And if they send me an email later and say, I want to talk with you about this topic, I have some context, I know who they are. Okay? And reason? Because we've exchanged names, we've exchange some personal information that allows me to identify them. If I have a Bluetooth earplug, if I have a Bluetooth mouse that I want to connect to my computer, I do the same thing. I connect it. I hold down a button on either side, and they find each other, and now that mouse or whatever will talk to that device, but not the other devices that are in the room. Right? We have mutual authentication. They know who they are, and they know what they're authorized to do. For general purpose computers, I might be willing to talk to anybody or talk to a lot of different devices at any given time. For special purpose computers, which IoT is all about special purposes, it really only has a few devices that it needs to talk with. Whoever's going to update its software, whoever it makes the report to or receives its commands from, not much of anybody else. And so if it can know those devices and be able to say, I've got this other device that wants to talk to me, and it's the wrong guy, that in itself produces a great deal of security value. So really looking pretty hard at mutual authentication in this context. Now, do I need all of them all the time? Probably not. But I need to use those tools in an intelligent way in order to accomplish the things that need to be done. And then looking at the data flows, if I go talk to a university professor and say, I've got IoT now, this is great stuff, what do you think about that? He's going to say, I've got lots of data, I'm going to do this big data thing, and that's all the rage, I'm going to write papers about big data. And I'm going to learn all kinds of things about the great wide world. But, and this was pointed out to me last week by a university professor, they don't think. And I've got my own IoT devices, and my data is out for everybody else to look at. And they're learning about me. The data that I put up there, and we all now put up a lot of data. I mean, when I walk into a room, when I walk into a building like this one, my telephone says, you have arrived at this particular location. Would you like to check in and tell me that you're here? And no, but no, we need to protect that information as well. The data flows, we tell people an awful lot about ourselves. Now, another issue is site security. And site security falls into several different categories. I might think about what's going on in my home. I might think about what's going on in a manufacturing floor, commercial building. And in what I'm about to talk about, I'm going to talk about controlled environments. Now, understand that I'm not promoting firewalls. I'm not promoting prophylactic security. But it has its purposes, it has its uses, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now what's prophylactic security? Well, we all have a firewall. Each of us has a firewall. We call it the skin. And it helps us with our health issues. But you know what? That is not the body's primary defense against bad stuff on the outside. In fact, if we see a person whose only health defense is their skin, we call them an AIDS patient, and we expect them to die. This is not sufficient. What the body does is it says, fine, I've got this firewall out here. I'm going to start out by assuming it's been breached. And then I'm going to have a number of systems behind that will produce pus or produce a fever or whatever it's going to take in order to combat the infection that comes in. And what we're talking about now in this site security thing, I'm kind of saying, yeah, I expect that there's going to be some kind of firewall, but the next step is going to be what do we do behind it? I'm talking here about what we do behind it. Now, if I'm depending primarily on firewall or depending primarily on using an IPv6 like local address or something like that, I have locality that allows peers to talk within that, but not to talk to anything outside. because it actually not provide anything outside. There's not a way for information to do that. And that has some real value, okay? I can prevent things from talking with each other that shouldn't, simply by putting up some kind of defense. However, we have lots of examples of where such defenses have been breached. The Iranian development of nuclear energy was put off, slowed down by a period of years by a virus, by any other name, that was able to cross an air gap, was able to get across that kind of a boundary. Okay, so to look at a boundary and say, I've got an enclosed system, things can only talk within themselves. Well, I'm told that a huge percentage of attacks come from behind firewall. That's not a sufficient defense. If I think about devices that talk with a remote manager, and now if I have a device that I name Alexa or Siri, and I say, Siri, tell me jokes, Siri, turn on the lights, Siri, call my wife. That's a device that is generally alone in a building or in a place and talks with a remote manager. Okay, so that would be an example of what I'm talking about here. And we can have a lot of those. So those are an important class of devices. And I would ask now, since we really can't put in a perimeter defense for it, and it's hard to have other defenses for that, it has to provide its own defense. So what do I know about the data? Is it encrypted? Is it being recorded? If it's recorded, can it be played back? And how do you know? When you bought something that said Alexa, how do you know whether it was able to protect its information? And so I think there's a number of questions that we have to ask about such devices. When I get into industrial automation, when I get into, so you know how the lights work in a room like this? It's not like there's a switch on the wall and there's a wire that goes to each one of these and says, okay, it's time for you to turn on. What happens is that the switch talks to a computer somewhere, which comes back and says, okay, you turn on, you turn off, and tells the lights what to do. Control of very simple things like lighting and air conditioning in buildings is handled by really a fairly sophisticated computer system behind the wall. And if I talk about building cars, if I talk about packing things in boxes, you think about all of the different things that are done in industry. Industrial automation very typically has a large number of IoT devices that are doing different things. Now, we have tools. These two have been defined in ISOCHK, which is a standards organization, that are designed to enable a relatively simple device to talk to a gateway, and then have the gateway talk to the things upstream. So EMQP, MQTT, and there's a list of others, but those are kind of the two big ones. The nice thing about them, there's a couple sides of it. One of them is that the networks that we run for this are, we call them lossy, low power, unreliable, lossy networks. And if I'm going to have a network that loses a lot of stuff, having it then attach itself to the internet and have to repeat itself over and over and over again to get anything done, that doesn't sound like a very productive way to do things. So putting that gateway in allows me to contain the unreliability. It also allows me to say, in that more sophisticated device, I can provide an appropriate TLS layer or whatever that might be. So there's value now in having a gateway around industrial automation, and use that to limit access into the domain. So just looking at the communications, not only encrypting the communications, which is important, but looking at the perimeter, looking at the security model of the system in which it's in use. There can be there can be important value there. Even with that and kind of pervasive through that, we need to ask ourselves, so who is, in the first instance, providing security for the device? When we send our 5-year-old to kindergarten, we tell them not to talk to strangers. We should tell our computers that too. They're often not much more intelligent than the children that we send to school. And that we can provide a defense in depth as a second layer. But in the end, every device has to protect itself using tools like I just mentioned, mutual authentication, encryption, whatever. I just said that. So, think about how you connect Bluetooth things to each other. You want to introduce them and let them talk. If they're not introduced, they shouldn't be talking to each other. Now, I mentioned grandma earlier. I'm looking at grandma again. What do we have in there? We have motion detectors. We have sensors of various kinds. And what do they tell us about grandma? Well, it might tell us her skin temperature. They might give us some idea whether she's got a fever. We can tell whether she's moving around, what room she last moved in, and that kind of thing. We can tell whether she rolled over in bed. We have sensors now that are commonly used in hospitals, where they put something in the bed and it enables them to tell whether the patient's heart is beating. They can listen to the heartbeat. They can do other things. We need to think in that context about who needs to know. Who needs to know? I want to authenticate. I want to know who I'm talking with. And then I need to consider authorization. What are they allowed to know? And at what level of granularity? And I need to encrypt the data at rest so that even if someone hacks the server that's behind that, they can't get to financial records, they can't get to health records, they can't get to other things that might be important to them. And of course, this is going to look at information in play. I've talked about that already, but it becomes very important in this kind of a model. Now then, the third step that I said needed to be looked at was the manufacturing and the maintenance of the computers that we use, the IoT devices. The example with the light bulb, if that tells us anything, it tells us that we need to test not only the device when it's operating normally, but when it's failing. Would it be really interesting to know that the light bulb was going to DOS the house before it actually did so, and maybe even fix that. And then as patches are developed, as software is improved, we need to be able to download and install updated software and get it in there. I heard a talk from a guy that I'm not allowed to attribute because he's very concerned about his company, he's concerned about his own security. But a person who manages a group that develops and applies patches and then hands them out to IoT developers throughout the world and tries to get them installed. And his observation is that maybe a third of them get installed, maybe a random subset of the third. And it's very hard for him to tell on a product that he thinks he's managing and developing what's actually out in the field. We need for people to update patches, and we need to have that software then installed at the telephone, the computer, or whatever it is. So, winding up here, from the Mirai attacks that we've had over the last couple of weeks, the way that got in, from as near as we can tell, there's a well-known username and password, a default, that got out there, and people used it. And as a result, we've got manufacturers being forced to recall product. Okay, and gee, that's expensive and pain. And I might ask, wouldn't it be nice if the software could just fix itself? Download a new version from somewhere and now not have the problem. And wouldn't it be even better if we had found that problem before the attack occurred? That's the concept. We can do that. We can do that. But it requires the products to be designed and maintained in a way that maintains the software according to well-known best engineering practices. We also, and here I'm referencing an article that just came out the other day, a blog, where the guy's talking about the Mirai attack and things that learned from that. And if you want to take that offline and look at that, I'd recommend it. And he includes in their recommendations from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. CERT, where they are just pointing out, hey, so don't have default passwords, change them. And update your softwares. And there's a particular protocol called Open Up. Please don't use that, just turn it off, don't put it in product. And then how do you know whether your device has these things or not? Well, often by reputation. You look at the company and say, this company, I know, that company, I don't know. Maybe I'm not to buy from the company that I don't know. And you know, think about the products that you bought. And you know, I have to say, we've been around this block before. I really feel like I'm fighting yesterday's battle. And we didn't win that one either. But the security problems, for the most part, we actually know how to fix, but we don't implement the solution. And I just strongly believe that we do. So with that.
So here comes the Q&A session. Any floor questions for Fred? Well, if there's no question, maybe proceed to a survey presentation. Mr. Baker, please stay on stage. Thank you. Okay, nice, we got one question.
Hello, questions about the liability of manufacturers of these IoT devices. Do you feel that there is any kind of product liability insurance that is necessary to provide feedback to the industry?
That's not an area that I know very much about. That said, manufacturers do have product liability under various laws, and sometimes they can get sued. So yes, there is, I think, insurance that can come involved in that. But you know, insurance is a way of paying for a risk. I'm saying let's not have the risk.
The next question will be at the back.
Okay.
Hi, Fred. I have two questions. First one, you mentioned that two-way authentication actually it's kind of work, right? Why haven't people implemented the drawbacks? That's one. The second one is you also mentioned that government is not the right body to govern it. So, I mean, which body is the right people, organization to actually help to say, hey,
Okay, I didn't catch your first question.
Okay, so the first one has to do with two-way authentication. Right? You said that works, but how can people do it? Right, it's actually quite simple to do.
Yeah, well, I would say that people don't do it because they have to think about it. It's not designed into the thing. You know, why do we not get software downloaded into a device and we're periodically updated? Well, somebody thinks they have to now support that and pay for something, and they choose to not do that. And you know, I think that's part of coming back to product liability. If you're not maintaining your software, I think you're exposing yourself to a risk. Why do people not do mutual authentication? Well, some do. Like I said, it's very common in Bluetooth. But we don't do it primarily in the internet because it takes some tinkering. Somebody has to do something. And we haven't done necessarily a good job in defining certificates so that people can install them and use that information, or in making that kind of security accessible. Now we have products that have done so, and here I'll point to Skype. Skype produces an encrypted communication pattern between known endpoints. And it does so without getting people down messy in the security details underneath. And that's a good thing. I think our security solutions should act like that. But we haven't done that in any generalized way, and that probably needs to happen. Now, why do I think governments are not the right solution? Two things. One of them, you know, I come from something of a libertarian bent. I think government, if I can do something in another way other than government, it's generally going to be done in a better way. That said, governments are here for the protection of their people. It's one of their primary purposes. And we're going to hear about that a little bit later. And, you know, if the government just really feels that it needs to get involved, well, I guess it should get involved. You know, I'd rather solve those problems without going to somebody that has a gun, without going, you know, getting hit with a hammer. Got another question up here.
So, do you think that one of the security issues in IoT is come from the nature of the protocol is too simple and they design the long history and do not have any standard. So, in this point, if this is true, is there any direction that IETF will define any standard to fix this problem?
Well, so we actually have developed protocols that have security options. So MQTT and AMQP, two things that I mentioned there, both support TLS, which is the S in HTTPS. Basically, it has TLS involved in it. So we do have protocols that will provide for secure environments. What tends to be an issue is getting them actually to be deployed. And people say, well, I can get the product out without doing that. I make money then. I'm happy. You know? So, one more.
So the last questions will be brought from this lady at the right-hand side.
Hi. For large-scale DDoS like Mirai that happened 2 weeks ago, it's often because the botnet victim didn't know that they're compromised. Do you think it's the responsibility of telco to alert them and to block certain CMC access ports?
I'm going to be very careful with that. Because, is it the responsibility of the plumber that installed pipes in your home to ensure that you're delivered clean water? Well, it is his responsibility to ensure that he installed clean pipes. Okay, but as far as ongoing monitoring water in your home, no, he did his job, he left. You know, that's not his responsibility. And so from that perspective, no, I would say a telco is not responsible for the data that flows through it. It's responsible to deliver that data according to the contract. It's not responsibility for the cleanliness of the data. That said, if there's an identified threat, if there's a problem going on, ISPs actually very actively manage traffic and will do things to block known threats. And they do that as much as anything for their own benefit. If there's a DOS that is going to attack your house, it's attacking them too, and they want to block that. Okay, so there actually are very good reasons for them to manage that traffic. But they don't do it because they have a fiduciary responsibility for your personal data. That's your problem. Okay, they do it because it affects their business, because it affects their customers.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Please stay on stage. And may I now invite Mrs. Song to present a souvenir to Mr. Baker as a token of appreciation. Thank you, Mr. Baker and Mr. Song. Please be seated. Next, let's invite Dr. Frank Law, Superintendent, Head of Cybersecurity Division, Cybersecurity and Technology Crime Bureau, Hong Kong Police Force. Dr. Lam will share with us on the IoT, a law enforcement perspective. Let us welcome Dr. Lam, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for Brett for sharing with us, getting some of the insight for the IoT. And regarding about the design, it provides some of the insight from the law enforcement perspective, the way that we're able to handle IoT in the later, say, 10 or 20 years later. So today, as explained by the MC, you can see I have a law enforcement Hong Kong Police Force. So today, I'm going to explain to you from the LE perspective regarding how we see the IoT and what the impacts that may potentially cause to the safety of the internet or from the virtual environment. But as this morning, a lot of the speakers already mentioned that for the IoT, they have the angels and devils, right? So I will be trying to look into these two different angles to see how the IoT, apart from causing some threat, to the internet environment, but at the same time, maybe it's kind of a benefit tools, for law enforcement or for public investigator to assist you to prove or dispute about some of the activities of the users. So first, I think we agree there are many cities nowadays, they try to talk this concept, smart cities. And for smart cities running, definitely there's a lot of the device, including those listed here, like alert systems, cars, public transport, or smart automation systems that will be embedded or networked with kind of centralized monitoring systems to assist them to see or to track out if there's any problems happening that may affect other operations of the cities, okay, or part of the entities. But this morning, for those of the distinguished speakers already saying that there are angels and devils. So first, we'd like to see, right, because of so many devices in the network, so you have the potential vulnerabilities that may exist in the device that may be causing implications if the device can be compromised or doing some act. So we may need to see where they're safe or not. Okay? From Frank, you see something, right? There's some of the standards that need to be followed. But there's a lot of improvement may be required, okay, to make the things better. So I think for IoT, I do some of the research, briefly, on the internet. As you can see, for the first research was done in January 2014, okay, 2 years ago. So for that, there's a researcher, so in the uni at the United States, just detect about over 100,000 of IoT devices were compromised. Okay. Scattered around in New York, Washington DC, and some of the East Coast cities. And those IoT devices that they said can be compromised, including smart TVs and refrigerators. So what those compromised devices have done in that context? It's not DDoS attack, just like the one that we happened, in the last month. But they used to sending spam emails, particularly for those including phishing elements. So at that time, the researchers described this kind of a thin board net. Okay? Not from board net, it's a thin board net because it comes from the Internet of Things. So you have this type of name. But for this one, you see about the seriousness of the this kind of compromise of IoTs. So this morning, for Nick Yang, our secretary for IDD, also mentioned about this attack. Just happened, last month. There's over 150,000 entries. We later on get able to explain to share. So I'm not telling too deep at all. But for those concerned, is below the DVRs and webcams can be compromised and launch the attack. Okay. Where there's any other source, we don't know. There's only discovered from the open source information. But indeed, it affects quite a lot of stakeholders like Twitter, Spotify, Netflix, Financial Times, etc. in the States, particularly the East Coast. So for this is a very good case just illustrate about the impact of the attack, right, as stated in the news. But the latest one that we found is not only happened in the States, but in Asia, Singapore. Okay. So it's just happened on the 25th of October this year, on which the startup is one of the very large backbone ISP service provider in the Singapore that have experience is not from overseas external IoT compromised device single attack, but from internal. That means it's kind of device that create or establish connect within the startup's network. So I have checked with the Singapore police. They say it's including some webcams, routers, and some of the device, including home automation systems, was being compromised. Okay, to launch the attack. There's a simple DDoS, but can fastly be notified or recognized by the startup, so able to be mitigated by filtering about the attacking traffic. So, but it's proved that the botnet from IoT is very active nowadays. There's 2 attacks in the same moment. Just some of the quick statistics to show you about the rapid development of the IoT. So as you can see, starting from 2005 around, you have more connected devices than people, okay, like including smartphones, and up to 2020. So the number of the IoT devices, including nowadays for the computers, laptops, etc., will be up to 50 billion devices. So you can see about the amount is huge. Okay? And the device per people, you can see it's nearly a multiple times the amount of people nowadays in the world. So for simple, that we see the future is anything that can be connected will be connected. Okay? So this is the norm that we cannot be avoid. And from the IoT perspective, just see we have more chance for criminals to compromise the current device to launch very self attack. It's not only for DDoS attack that you see, but with the personal data that will be stored in an IoT device, like including your home automation systems, or even simply your smartphone. For those will be a target, okay, for criminals to harvest the information and commit various kind of crimes. And I sent the commission this morning and saying that for the overall crime rate in Hong Kong, regarding traditional crime will drop since 1979. But for cyber crimes, yes, it's keep upsurging, right, non-stop. Okay? And this year we will see this kind of, say, breaking equilibrium, but still there's maybe 5% upsurge. And for last year, give you rough figures, it's around 6,000 something of cases. But in 2009, it's only 1,500 of cases. So the cases amount have become a big jump. But what's concerned is not only case, but for the loss. Okay. The last years, the loss regarding these cyber crimes is involving 20 billion of Hong Kong dollars. But up to 2009, there's only talk about a few $1 billion. So you see criminals is trying to move themselves from traditional way to cyber way. So we talk about IoTs. This search engine, I think some of you are able to look into the internet or do Google search. You're able to identify. It's called the Symposium. So I think it is one of the very powerful search engines nowadays. Able to assist you to search for IoT device connected to the internet. Okay. So the device simply I search in Hong Kong. We pull up, a list of devices, including some webcams, some systems, laptop computers, or even I can see there's a VDR to connect to. So like this one, we show about the locations and IP address. The ISP, and this one is connected to the Hong Kong broadband network. So you can see how vulnerable are IoT devices. They're very easy to discover, by people once they go online if they know the tricks. Like for the signature, and the ways they communicate using one packet. And for this tool, it's not only for you to discover, but to assist your company to defend any IoT device being discovered, or to show up their looking to the others. So for criminals, once you discover this IoT then definitely we think of is any ways able to compromise it. Simply, you could treat IoT device like a computer, but it's not too powerful at all, and there, the content there may not be too much as a laptop or just a computer, but at least you can use it as a device able to be, say, routing some of the bad traffic, or you can using kind of a spreading of malicious code, or even use it as a springboard for an offline access. Right? Those all reposing indications is not only to all of you here, but particularly if you see your system is compromised or trace it back to your IoT device, then you make a report to the police or other say public investigator. That will be our responsibility to address this issue. But as mentioned by Fred, the standard is all the data funding there may not have a very good, say, constituents right now. So may not have enough details for law enforcement to trace it. If you don't have a standardized format. So there's another indications that we are now able to see. But anyway, there's some of the general practices that able to assist you to mitigate the amount of threat from IoT device. Simply, if your company develop the better policies, procedures, standards to assist your staff able to deal with the arrangement of IoT device is one of the methods. Training, definitely, to make them aware if there's any potential threat from the IoT device. Do they avoid the using of IoT devices as programs? Is there any good practices to assist them to minimize the threat from IoT? Yes, disable the say commercial plug-and-play. So those are the simple methods to assist you. Risk management, develop a plan to assist you to manage the threats. This always works. Detect any vulnerabilities. In case you see some of the vulnerabilities or patches nowadays, because mainly it's particularly focused on the operating systems, right? Or some of the device. But for IoTs, still, it's still very new areas. But later on, I think, I talked to some certs. Okay, they say that this part of the area that we try to develop, and maybe later on they become announcements about the threat from IoT like patches. That we allow people to update them. And lastly, is from law enforcement side or from the public investigator, is develop skill sets to conduct digital forensic investigations on IoT device. Because of the device itself, it's quite different from the like computers and smartphones. They may need a new skill set. Okay, and for the different kind of architectures or hardware components may differ. So for the areas that people need to properly conduct kind of digital forensics, maybe you still require some time for us to adjust and learn about the best way to do it. So some play, simple terms because those are more general. So you see about high-level preventions. Before some of the more practical way. So just links up, for you to take a look. First is no default password. Use a strong password, just like FBI, right? The best practices. Because we know for some of the IoT device, I don't name about the manufacturer. They say that they can't change the default password at all. So it causes a problem. So as one of the questions from the audience, is saying that whether the manufacturer itself may be responsible for part of the way to say enhance the security of IoT. First of all, I think they need to think about the way they're able to at least allow users to change the password. Okay, they will make the device more safe. Another thing is, for the IoT device, they need to be networked. Apart from one network, most of them nowadays are using wireless. So the wireless protections, like you better protect the key or using encryptions are basics to prevent the IoT to compromise through illegal access through wireless. And third is the segregations of network. So the IoT device, together with the other computers or important assets on the network, need to be segregated into different parts, such that if the device was compromised, you will not likely start up incidents. The attack will not start from internal. At least it will be, say, contained situations in the down environment to avoid further compromise of IoT device. Disable the universal plug-and-play is a method. Lastly is, just like we persuade people to buy stuff, from some of the reputable and trustable manufacturer. Those will be able to be applied to those schemes or security measures to enhance the system's security. So this is what we see about the basics for you to follow in order to properly protect the IoT device or protect you from attack from those devices. So previously we see the threat, the DDoS, the email spamming, or even the thing for etc. So maybe we could see from another angles because we talk about angels and networks. Right? So now I would like to let you to see from different angles to see how our device from the API CSS is doing digital investigations. Okay. So I don't know any one of you are fans of CSI. Yeah, for me, I'm a big fan of CSI. So maybe now I just want you to be a CSI investigator. Okay, and take a look at the device about this to see whether you're able to identify any potential traces that may assist for investigations. First one. Good thing. For Tesla, in January this year, they announced that they will have a networked car coming out a few years later. Okay. But nowadays for car, you think of is any device that's maybe networked, this kind of IoT that may be able to assist you to do investigation? Probably a GPS device, right? They're able to see, because some of the car itself will be recorded on GPS to see where you go, in fact, history, etc. The other thing is, it's kind of a how to say, this kind of a locator, GPS device locator, or this kind of a video recorder, we're getting the way to see. I can see, many cars on the road nowadays, there's this kind of recorder on the car. And there's a two brands have been, I think, released last year, saying that, for those footage or information that be recorded in that place, you're able to be transmitted to their cloud server, okay, such that you're able to have a whole backup. So those informations will be recorded in this kind of device. We're able to assist you in case you track the criminals where they go, or there's a kind of kidnap case to see about the track. Then you're able to see if you find this kind of device on the car. So it's one of the things. Or if you find this one networked, let's say it's up to the cloud, probably we will go to the cloud server and see what kind of footages or informations, like the GPS locations that you recorded. So those are the informations that may be useful for investigation. Apart from that, Topaz. Topaz is also very good, able to provide you very good traces, able to track where the device will go. So because you see, like in Hong Kong, there are Topaz systems, right? So some of the information can be automatically recorded and transmitted to their main database servers. Probably it's not 100% an IoT device. But later on, I heard that they will have a kind of a network functions, okay, to assist the user to have a real-time experience of record, adapt, and balance they will have. So later on, for Topaz, maybe it's kind of a good thing. So take a look to see where they go, or past which kind of the say tunnels or highways, etc. So those are the UIs. How about this one? Anyone recognize about this device? No? It's kind of a smart electrical meters. Smart electric meters. Okay. So this is the one, the old days in our home is a black one, right? But now, this model is not exactly the same one. But for Hong Kong, they're trying to introducing this kind of smart device. I mean, for this electric meters, able to measure about the amount of electricity that you consume in your house and then charge you. And for this one, you have a kind of smart device able to be shown about the consumptions of electricity. Do you think it's any useful for us to do investigations? Yes. How useful it is? Yeah. Yep. So, from that, no ideas at all.
Growing marijuana.
Yeah, correct. You check about the people activities, okay? Because I see a very good research paper from Harvard University, the researcher. You check about the electricity consumptions of a house. Indeed, you didn't go to your house itself and meet about people, but see about the papers. Then you can estimate when the home activities was keeping busy. Say when the kids come home and or the fathers come back. Then you see about when they operate the electrical heater, then something is upsurge. When they open the oven, they will upsurge. You see about the behavior of people, like how many people are living in that home. They get a guess is correct using 40 people. Okay, here. And also you see about the patterns of using the say electrical heaters, like for using the oven or using the say water heater, and you guess the amount of people taking showers, etc. Okay. So, but the thing about the patterns, then you see about the behavior of the guy. Okay. So if you see about the lightning of consumptions, it dies out after 3 a.m. So that means this guy will be work late, right? If you see about the electricity consumptions, it's just died out at say 9 or 10 a.m., 9 or 10 p.m. Then you will see about the guys really sleep early. Right? And also if you see about the consumptions itself, there's a week, it's remain stable. What's that mean? There's nobody at home at all. So some people will claim to have alibi or something, right? To be committing offense or something. And this is a very good supporting evidence, right? Circumstantial evidence to prove about the act. Smart TV, surely, right? A lot of information there. First, we have a MAC address. You have to log out this device. Possibly we would be able to do DDoS attack. You compromise it. I don't know any of you. I think smart TV is being more popular in Hong Kong. But I don't know whether of you have installed any other software on the smart TV. Did the manufacturer provide any solutions? No, right? So probably it's running Android, but so far it's hard to find any solutions. But I heard about that because it's running on Android. Some of the Android systems supported AV software able to run on smart TV, but still it's not very smooth or because of the compatibility problem. But anyway, for smart TV, you plug in your USB device. I don't know whether you know, every plug in on a computer, they leave a traces. Yeah, there are traces. If you plug in any USB device on a smart TV, like if you say use the TV to view a couple of say child porn or some of the malicious videos, or even to distribute some files to the others, so you have traces there. You have the first plug-in time, the last plug-in time, when the user uses it, the serial number of the USB device, and those are the very good informations that we are allowed to be used by the investigator to see. Another thing is, for those devices nowadays, it's support for Skype, instant messages, and also some of them also able to connect to cloud, like to the Apple Cloud, or the iTunes, LG Cloud, etc. And those connections to cloud be able to reveal some of the account information, or even what sort of data being put in the cloud, because those still have some caches retained in smart TV. And for some of the historical data, we can get applications that you install there, maybe something may be useful. So this all depends, and because of more and more activities on smart TV, so you buy another arena of evidence able to provide the investigator, to see what sort of thing will happen, when the users on that through TV. And then recognize some other systems. It's kind of home security systems, very easy to understand. Right? So you see nowadays they have a panel, a tablet, or even use the mobile phones, or even a smartwatch, in control of it. So you record about the movement, just like such as activities. Is anyone just trespassing, or is there any bodies that will be able to be, say, use a false alarm, etc. And particularly for the footage itself, some of them stored in cloud, and those network device definitely provide you some additional information if you want to know more about the activities of people at their home, or the places that we install the device. So I think this one is quite interesting. So lastly, I think smartphones undoubtedly provide a lot of information. At home, apart from the device, there's still a lot of the, say, tablet or a power supply, heater, control, etc. We also provide a lot of traces if they're networked. Okay. And this is the case. This is not the case, as I say, for refractory, but For this advanced refrigerator, you're able to use it to surf the internet, also to take pictures of yourself. Okay, and also they have a different cubicle within the refrigerator. They're able to suit about the behavior or the, how to say, the choice of people to see what sort of stuff being put there. Okay? So for those, maybe sometimes provide some useful information, but later on, maybe more that we don't know. Let's see how the information is. So you can see in the traditional way of visual evidence on computers, but now you're able to identify any kind of user profile on those devices. You're able to get data. Lastly, because of the creation of different data, different IoT device, so those may be able to complement with the traditional digital forensic investigations. But we still need to spend some time to explore, because for us, if we need to present the information or the evidence to the court, we need to have very high standard. Okay? But for some of the, say, tracking of activities or public investigations, those may be some of the good stuff we can assist you with the investigations or some of the tracing. Okay, of people. And this case in Canada in November 2014. So in which Fitbit have you used in the courtroom? So you see a case. There's a Canadian young woman involved in car accidents. For car accidents, definitely involving about insurance, compensation, etc. Right? And in the old days, the lawyer itself maybe required some of the findings from the doctor through consultations or kind of a diagnosis. Some of them, they say maybe have bias. Okay? But now, they try to be using Fitbit. By using Fitbit, to put on the wrist of the young woman, it would track the activities of the woman, and then to benchmark it with the others and normal people to see whether the accidents itself is causing any permanent injuries or effect to the body. Okay? So this is a very interesting case that I think IoT data they can able to put in cover. The simple stuff is IoT data like your smartwatch, like my Apple Watch. The connectivities is not only for the device itself, but sometimes it will connect to other devices like smartphone, very common. And for the smartphone, we've been involving some applications, and also if in case they need to track the locations, like my watch, the GPS tag there. Right? So by combining those information, to see the contacts, messages, photos, or the last stored locations being perceived or moved by the user. Like my watch, you see apart from those say contact messages, there's a lot of information, right? Like you could browse the internet, switch on the camera, listen to music, check about the contacts, have a map, Google map there. So there's lots of information now that's being created by our device that we cannot be avoided and may be relevant for us to take reference to it. And for the whole concept itself, apart from data, so we also reach the information that we collected, we formulate kind of a timeline, okay, able to assist us to do a full investigations. So as investigators, I think we nowadays is not only look at the traditional digital evidences below, but the traces technology device we do not should be overloaded, because for the whole we'll be able to provide more corroborational evidence for the court and restricting about any findings that we find. Right? It's not only rely on a single, say, smartphone or laptop or desktop computer or external hard drive, but on the device itself. So say with Angel and Davos, we do risk and reward. Okay, so we need to strike a balance. We know how the device, their threats, vulnerabilities there, they're able to be, say, launch attack against the others. But another thing is they contain, very valuable information that may assist our investigations. And this is all talk about awareness of people. Say, we're aware about threat from them, unblock the attack, or properly catch them to avoid them being exposed to conduct any cyber attack. But the other way, we need to train up our investigator or everyone here to know there's some relevant information that will be useful for us. Okay? So this is what we call Angel networks. So for home police, we do have and running the cybersecurity divisions, we do provide a lot of assistance to the public particularly to critical infrastructures. So in case you need some help, you can approach us, or even you can see for homeowner. Right? They also provide a lot of useful or valuable advice to you in case you have to deal with IoT attack, or there's any information stemming up from IoT. So because I think it's kind of a synergy need to be created, because there's a lot of, say, innovative device coming up. So it's also about how to be collaborate with each other to deal with the problem. So it's all about my presentation today. Yeah, thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you. Next up, we have the session. Do you have any more questions for Dr. Noor?
Right. It's just for you. Well, you know, in the old days when we first got the internet, I guess the collecting or getting evidence or information from ISPs or from the internet was kind of easier because we basically you just talk to the ISP and you go to the ISP and you have not everything, but most of what you wanted. Now, but now with IoT, where you have thousands of manufacturers, you have even more application developers who utilizes or write programs on these devices, and then they are implemented, by other sets of actors. So, I mean, how do you plan on, I guess, when you have a case, or even, I guess, not even have a case, I mean, when even just talking about crime prevention, how are you going to engage that in this regard?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Because right now, as Chester mentioned, that yes, a lot of the manufacturers nowadays, just like in old days, mobile phones, right? We have a lot of brands of mobile phones. So in that time, we just have a case-specific engagement. Because we don't have much resources to engage everybody. But hopefully, nowadays, everyone changed to smartphone, to systems, right? Android, Apple. So make it more easier. So we don't know about the trend, whether for the later future directions, whether you have a kind of convergence, okay, to some of the brand of the economy. But right now, I think the proper way that we do is to doing a specific automatic engagements. In case we see some threat, like the latest one, the attack is from CCTV or DVR, we will approach the manufacturers to get more information to see how we properly communicate the threat. And is anything that we're able to help, say for example, to develop some of the crime prevention message, such as the one that I just said, the practice, change the default password, or say disable the plug and play, etc. So for those are the stuff that we're now doing, but I think there's still a long way to go. Because with more and more items been coming up, and the variety of items of IoT is different from the old days. But it's not only a single type. And you can list out, right, the car automating systems, electric meters, or even there's some of the unavoidable, like the emotional risk and everything, because the domain itself is large. So I think we should spend more times explore the best way, okay, to approach those manufacturers. But right now, I think we were doing some of the general briefing. First is to raise awareness of people. We're getting how to handle IoT and the potential threat that we do to make them prepare for the future challenge that will come and maybe affect our daily life.
As the victim of Hong Kong's first hacking incident, what I learned from going through the court process was the admissibility of evidence.
Yeah.
So my question is, what are we doing in Hong Kong to train our judges for relying on the circumstantial evidence that the IoT will bring? How are we training them? What are we doing with the judiciary?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. So for training, we have a two-type training. First is the on-the-job training. We send them to prosecute criminals, and then of course we educate the judge and prosecutors and juries regarding what is digital evidence, why they're admissible, and is anything that able to maintain integrity, how we present it. But another stuff is we have some of the thematic training for other judges and the prosecutors. We do have some of the say briefing programs and educate them the basics of digital evidence. Okay? But we see about the some of the newer generations of judges, these are keep changing. 10 years ago, I think they have some difficulties. It's not all to understand about digital evidence and the way that we present them and why they're able to record, the activities of users. But now we see some of the, the newly joined judge. I think they now become younger generations to come in. So they're more capable of using smartphones, different kind of device. Okay? Unlike in the old days, they stick to the paper, they format. So now we see the progress is doing quite well. But still, there's a lot of way to go. Like the IoT, I think we still need to develop kind of, training, for the judges in case there's we see there's an upstream chain of cases involving IoTs. Otherwise, I think it's quite difficult for them to understand about the concept between. And those evidence that we dig out from IoTs is very much different from the old days, from smartphones or from the laptop or this computer. This is what we're doing.
We have another question from the left.
Hi, I just have a quick question. Do you need a warrant from a judge to access that data? Because like in America now you see, companies like Apple and Microsoft are starting to push back against American law enforcement efforts to collect their users' data. And I'm wondering what the situation is here in Hong Kong. Do you see someone like an ISP or Hong Kong Electric sort of refusing an order from the police to turn over data in terms, data privacy protection?
Yeah. So because for personal data, I think in Hong Kong we have a personal data privacy audience and established. And actually, we self-search warrant with the many service provider, to obtain some of the information that we relate to personal data. So this kind of requirement in Hong Kong nowadays. But under the police force audience itself, in case we say arrest criminals, and if he needs protections, okay, or the area around, then we suspect there's any device that may be relevant to have evidence to say prove his criminal activities. We do have a kind of a law, the power under the law to seize those devices and do examinations. Okay? This kind of investigating process itself. But it's everything involving asking service provider to say provide some of the personal data, such as a subscriber of IP address. We need a search warrant, okay, or a subpoena in this case.
We have a question from the back.
Yeah, two questions. The European data protection law is restricted. Some of the data can go outside of countries, and in some of the financial institutes, they start requiring, the regulators start requiring data has to stay within the country. Do you see that Hong Kong actually require such a mandate that the data of whoever is being used in here got to stay in Hong Kong? So that's one part. The second part is if that is the case, if that is the law, so whose responsibility is it to enforce that? Is it the police, or is it the manufacturers self-govern themselves, or is it us who can actually go and inquire and say, where's my data? So, okay.
Yeah, for the second one, I think it's hard for me to answer you because for the bodies itself, I think it's up to the government. I mean, it's a very high level to decide, who is responsible for the protections. But for the first part, regarding my views, regarding whether we're able to retain data within the jurisdictions of Hong Kong, just like the European one, I think maybe it's kind of hard to comply with it. In case, if you investigate for cyber crimes, because cyber crime avoidance, okay? There's a lot of, say, the attack maybe is not only from Hong Kong, but from anywhere around the world. And there's any jurisdictional issues for hackers. So in case, suppose this attack is originated from Hong Kong to say there's a server in Japan, then the Japanese law enforcement will definitely trace back and ask us to provide information. If we have these kind of restrictions to provide data, then I think they can conduct the investigation properly, right? So right now, we do have a kind of a mutual legal assistance treaties that would assist us to exchange of information in a proper framework in the laws of Hong Kong. But personal views, I think if we need to, say, address the challenge from the attack from different parts of the world, or to arrest the criminals, particularly cyber criminals, that may be committed bonus crimes. This kind of exchange is very important. If we, say, continue to repel data with certain restrictions, I think it will encourage those cyber criminals to commit crimes, particularly for those who start the attack from Hong Kong. because anywhere, like because Hong Kong, we say, sorry, we can't provide data because of these restrictions. Then we'll be definitely to encourage the criminals to string in activities or to encourage them to do more activities there. This is not the police view, it's want to see.
Do we have the last question from the floor?
Sorry, one more. You know that China recently announced a new cybersecurity law, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably done in China. Since it's a one country, two system, they probably will do it. So how do you see that may or may not be affecting Hong Kong?
I think it's hardly affect Hong Kong because we have, you say, right, one country, two systems. But personally, I think it's a very powerful law. Okay. That for the law enforcement itself, we have to see the law, okay, because it's very powerful. But strike the balance, right? Because we have a freedom of people here, and also another way we encourage people to do business here freely and have freedom of speech. Serious law, maybe firstly, okay. So it's just my personal view. So the law established in mainland, I think, is nothing affecting Hong Kong. As you can see, about a lot of things now is quite separate between the two countries right now. Okay. So here's my view.
Thank you, Dr. Law. Please stay behind, and may I now invite Mr. Song to present a souvenir to Dr. Law as a token of appreciation. Thank you, Dr. Law and Mr. Song. Please be seated. Now, may I invite Mr. Andrew Sullivan, Fellow of Dean and Chairman of Internet Architecture Board, to come onto stage to share with us on Internet of Things and the Future Network. Mr. Sullivan, please.
Thank you very much. I am Andrew Sullivan, and I want to thank you for inviting me here today to speak. I want to start by noting that though I am the chair of the Internet Architecture Board, I always have to make this obligatory disclaimer. If I tried to, they would come and hit me with pitchforks and so on. So we're going to talk today, I guess, a little bit about the Internet of Things. That's why we're here. And the only problem with this term, of course, is that it obscures as much as it illustrates. Because there are some things about the Internet of Things that trouble me. One of them is that we've got entirely new kinds of things that we're introducing, and then on the other hand, we've got some things that are very, very old and we're already used to, and that causes us some trouble. This is as easily as big a change as the introduction of the car to various places in the world that had smaller, traditions, older kinds of forms of transportation, things that were slower, and so on. In fact, this is in many ways worse because the cities into which cars were introduced had centuries, sometimes many centuries of history that allowed a culture to build up around them. But the internet is actually only about 50 years old, less than that. And what this means is that we're introducing a sea change to an environment that itself hasn't actually developed completely its culture yet. And this is a very interesting kind of change that's going to make some big differences, I think. Now, Vitruvius, I like Vitruvius. He was a Roman architect. And since I like to talk about architecture, I like to rely on this guy. He was a Roman architect. And there were a whole bunch of things that he liked about architecture. He wrote some books called the 10 Books about Architecture. I'm sure they were called something else when you were speaking Latin, but that's how we get them now. And in there were a couple of things that were important features of good architecture. One of them was propriety. The idea of propriety is that it fits well with all of the other stuff that's going on around it. So it fits well into well-established rules, into the society into which it's going, and so on. And the other one was economy. And economy is not just that it's cheap. It's also that it's the proper management of building, the materials, and the site. But also, you have to suit the thing that you're building to the function that's expected of it. So you build a house different than you build a temple, different than you build a public building, and so on. And I think that these are two really critical principles for architecture of anything, including computer systems. I think that the Internet of Things actually doesn't observe these two principles very well. I think that that's part of the problem. And so I'm going to try to convince you that there's actually an architectural effect here. What we're really doing here is a kind of experiment. I said this to some people this morning, that what we're doing is we're trying to connect like every insecure thing we can think of to the internet and see what happens. And that's the kind of experiment that we're going to run. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to alter the internet itself, and that means that we need to think about those consequences. It's really important to remember that what I'm thinking of here is the traditional architecture of the internet. So we've got these smart endpoints, and the internet itself, the network, is supposed to be kind of dumb, right? You're not supposed to have a lot of intelligence in the network. This is a virtuous approach to making an internet, but the difficulty may be that it causes certain kinds of failure modes that can lead to a sort of Pyrrhic victory. We've got the internet now everywhere, and now what we're going to do is hook up all these smart devices at the end that aren't very well secured, and maybe the whole thing is going to fall apart. All right, so the Internet of Things is kind of a slogan, and it hides some distinctions. And today I want to talk about two pieces of the Internet of Things. I'm going to talk about the Internet part and the things part. I'm going to leave the of alone. So we're going to start with things, and the reason I'm going to start with things is because they're tricky. There are a lot of things in the world. Many of these things are sort of simple, and we're used to them, right? We have stuff we want to hook up. So I recently, for instance, bought a new thermostat for my house because that's handy. I'm on the road and I forget to turn the heat down, and so then when I'm on the road I can turn the heat down. I live in Canada. Turning the heat down is an important part of my life because if I got home after an empty house of a week long and I'd been heating it as though I was living there, it would be expensive. So this is an obvious thing to do. The way we describe these things, of course, are always like smart thermostat or smart car or smart light switch or whatever. And the reason we do that is because we're not really describing what the thing is, because that's a better market result, right? People want to buy a smart light switch. They don't want to build. What did I write it down here? Actuator for electric lights with optional lumen level description function. That would not be a very good sales pitch. So instead, you've got to have a smart light switch. But really, the Internet of Things just has two components to it. One are these actuators, so they cause action in the world, and the other side are the sensors, and they detect state in the world. And you put them together, because you don't want one of these without the other. Not very interesting to know about the world without being able to do anything about it. Really, really useless to be able to do something about the world without knowing what you did. So you really need both of these kinds of things, and once you put them together and connect them to the Internet, you have an Internet of Things. The thing is that these are already things that people are used to having. And the human factors there are really, really bad. So I mean, you can introduce lots of new kinds of things, stuff that people aren't used to having. But if you're trying to, make a lot of money quickly, which is of course what most people are trying to do, then you don't want to invent a thing that nobody's ever thought of unless there's a need that they don't understand they have. Much easier to say, look, you can make your life a whole lot better by getting this light switch. So we always assume local access for most of these kinds of things, right? The mental model that you have is you've got your light switch, and only the people in your house can turn on lights in your house. And that's a really important feature of it. And then a second feature is that it's kind of neighborhood knowledge that it leaks. It doesn't tell very many people in the world. Maybe people in your immediate neighborhood can look at your house, notice the bedroom lights are on, and know whether you're home. And even then, they don't exactly know, assuming that you keep your blinds closed. So there's a limit to how much knowledge that leaks. And the the Internet of Things breaks this geographic-centric nature of the location that we have. So the things are geographically located, and they model a geographic pattern, but they give information off to everybody else in the entire universe. Well, as far as we know. And that's a thing that is a cultural problem that I think we're going to have to change. We're going to have to face the fact that this is an architectural development, a development of technology in the world that is going to change our culture. I was talking to somebody about this earlier today, and he said, "Oh, I don't think that we have to worry about that future because kids are just going to think that everything is networked in the future." And I mean, that may be true, but he's talking about people who are 6. And I think that there are a lot of people who aren't 6 yet, in the world. And so we're going to have at least 20 or 30 years here of change period where we've got an enormous amount of upheaval because we're introducing into the world things that radically alter your relationship to physical objects. And we're going to have to train people who are, like I'm getting old, and I'm not the oldest person that I know. And if those people get internet light switches in their houses, they're going to be really, really confused by them. So I think that this creates a bunch of incentives about things that are really important. And it comes back to something that I think Fred raised earlier, and that is governments take an interest in this. And one of the reasons governments take an interest in this, of course, is that the kinds of things we're hooking up are already subject to government regulation. Most electrical systems have a bunch of laws concerning what can be connected to them and so on. Most cars have an enormous amount of legislation related to that. I'm going to come back to the car analogy in a minute. And so we've got things that we're hooking up to the internet. They're already regulated by the government, and so you're going to interest regulators in it. So that's the first side. We're changing the mental model. Now I want to talk about the internet side, because we have another issue going on there. One of the really big problems about the internet side of things is that the incentives are backwards. So Fred was talking about how people, we've already got these sorts of security technologies already deployed, and I agree with him that a lot of these discussions sound like things that we've been talking about for many, many years. And yet, people haven't deployed those things. Well, why not? The reason is manifold, but the first is that the incentives for the security are really backwards. When a device manufacturer sends something out into the field, if that causes somebody to call them up to get customer support, it can wipe out the profit on the device forever if it was cheap enough. So if that's the case, there's going to be no way that people are going to do that. And this is what Fred said, people won't pay for security. I think that that's true, but I think the problem is maybe on its head there, that really the issue is usability of security is so hard that you just set up a dynamic in which people won't deploy it because it breaks stuff. The second, of course, is another thing that Fred mentioned, which is that there's a lot of pressure to ship very quickly, and if you're going to ship things quickly, then you're going to cut features. The first feature you can cut is security, because nobody notices that when you cut that feature, so it doesn't matter, right? And the only problem is everybody else in the world is faced with the downside of that. This is what's called in economics an externality. What I do is I take a problem for me, and I make all of you pay for it, and that's a good thing for me. So what this means is that the incentives are aligned incorrectly. We also have this problem, we just saw the slide that showed it, that we're deploying many more devices than people. And so if these two security things remain problematic, and we continue to deploy at this rate, then what we're doing is populating the internet with a botnet. That is just going, it's just waiting to be a botnet. It's not really maybe a botnet the day it turns on, but it could be a botnet very shortly thereafter. And so these are these three bad incentives that I think are problematic. And notice, an important piece of this is that there's really no access control to the internet. So we're building a system that is designed on top of a network architecture that was fundamentally open. It was intended to be open. You know how it got designed this way? This is the true fact of it. It was designed this way because all of the people on the internet knew each other. When the internet was being designed, if you wanted to find out who somebody was, you could write away on paper to a bunch of people, and they would write back to you with a mimeographed copy of all the names and addresses of everybody who was connected to the internet. It's not that hard to secure a network like that, because if you don't like what somebody's doing, you call them up and throw them off. That's what you do, and this is especially true if everybody's under contract to a military, because then it's really easy to throw them off. But that's not the network that we have anymore. And I think that that's a really fundamental change that we didn't actually address in the architecture of the internet. We've tried, we've added some security features and so on, but we fundamentally have not really done anything about it. There is another thing that I want to point out here, and that is that the internet itself, the patterns, the use patterns of the internet are going to be radically altered by the Internet of Things. And that's because the Internet of Things changes the kinds of things that are talking to one another. In the past, the entire dynamic was designed around humans at one end of something. So you had a human eventually, even if you were talking about machine-to-machine stuff. The machine-to-machine things were happening in the service of someone ultimately consuming that data, right? So you're making your CDN better or something like that. It all ultimately ended up with a human at the end. And the human could, if everything went pear-shaped, could call you up and say, hey, look, this is broken. But in an Internet of Things, what you have are sensors and actuators talking to, maybe their management system, maybe a central service that is doing this thing, or maybe other sensors and actuators. But there's no human at any point along this chain. It's only a human who consumes the combination of those things that causes this effect. And so that's a difference. That will change the kind of traffic. And we're going to have to learn how to manage traffic in a new way. This means that all of the network operators in the world are going to have to learn new skills. So when you introduce a completely new technology that upends the environment in which it's in, what that means, of course, is that everybody's got to change their pattern of work. Oops, well, that was that slide. Now, into this, I want to introduce governments. Now, it was about 50 years ago, a little more than that this enormous change happened to the American automotive industry in particular, but it happened to much of the world. This was a book that Ralph Nader published, and it's mostly famous now for having destroyed a car called the Corvair in North America. But it actually, it did something much more important, and I think that that's the key piece here. It convinced Americans that their entire culture, which was based on the car, needed to be regulated by governments. Even Bob Lutz, who went on to a long career in the automotive industry and was completely opposed to all of these regulations, he later said, let me get it right, the book had a seminal effect in ensuring there was definitely a role for government in automotive safety. So this is the guy who was opposed to every single thing that the National Highway Transportation Safety Authority ever did, and yet he's saying, well, it turned out they were right. Transformative technologies do not merely add something new to the culture to which they're introduced. Because they're transformative, they're fundamentally in tension or sometimes in opposition to the culture. That is, they're transforming it. And the thing that's being transformed is, of course, going to oppose that because things are naturally conservative. So in the earliest part of the 20th century, for instance, you didn't have to cross the road at a well-marked place. You just crossed wherever. In some places, that's still true. But in a lot of places, it's no longer true. Like in Los Angeles, for instance, people learned by the 1920s that they had to cross at crosswalks. And this was a change where people just had to modify their behavior because there was this new technology around. And I think that this is an important lesson for the internet because, of course, the internet is doing that kind of transformation. But there's another thing about these transformative technologies that's important. Because the technology starts to change the culture in that way, the culture responds to it by saying, hey, wait a minute, if you're going to change us, we're going to have control over you. We're going to start to regulate you. We're going to start to make decisions about how you're going to work. And so far, the internet has escaped that. The internet has escaped it by and large because of its nature. I'm going to come to that in a moment, but it has escaped it. Nevertheless, we have this tradition, right, that we shape our tools first and then our tools shape us. This is a quote from John Culkin. And what this means is that the tool shapes us, changes our culture, and then we shape it back, and so we make some changes, and this runs in a circle. And I get from this a couple of principles about the internet, how it shapes us and how we're going to shape it back. The first one is, I think, that the internet tends to encourage us to build atop already deployed systems. It shapes our choices because it says, hey, look, you've already got this thing here. This is the kind of technology that's possible. It's cheaper and easier to do it that way, so you're going to build on top of the already deployed stuff. The second one, which is maybe a derivative principle, is that the web is massively successful compared to most of the rest of the internet technologies. And therefore, what we're going to tend to do is build things on top of the internet that look like web technologies. And this has certain consequences, like, for instance, that we're going to have centralized systems. We're going to keep talking back to things out there on the internet rather than talking to things out at the edge. This edge is the traditional thing that we said about the internet, right? It's got this smart edge, and what that meant is the devices at the end point. They were smart. But what we're seeing now, of course, is that that principle is moving up the stack and it's moving into the application layer. And the edge is losing and the center is beginning to win. And in this sense, it's still the edge in computer topological sense. That is, the edges are talking to one another, but the applications are not at the edge, they're in the middle. That changes what's happening. That changes the environment into which we're working. That creates certain vulnerabilities, certain opportunities as well. I do think, however, that these principles have consequences. Like, for instance, the first of these principles means that the problems that we already understand on the internet are going to be with us for a whole lot longer. You know, DNS has all of these problems because it's based on UDP. That's not going away, folks. Every time I hear somebody saying, "Oh, we're just going to replace DNS," I'm okay. You know, come back to me when you've got your plan, because what that means is we're going to upgrade every computer on the internet at the same time. As soon as you got your plan, I'll be ready. Principle 2 is this thing that I was talking about, that it's apt to create centralization of applications, and I think that is that's got some big consequences. Now, one of the things that's really hard to explain to people, particularly who are not familiar with its architecture, is that the internet, and you all know this, the internet is a network of networks. But what this means, of course, is that when you say the internet, it's really a mass noun. It's like traffic, right? So you can't fix traffic. I mean, people are always talking about this. They talk about traffic management, but the truth is you can't change traffic. What you can do is change the incentives for particular drivers. So you can make rules about who can drive on a given day. What that does, of course, is take some drivers off the road. You can cause people to want to avoid certain routes because you put big speed bumps in the road, and so it's slow and unpleasant to drive on. You change their patterns of behavior. You can deploy Waze or other kinds of technologies like that cause the drivers to figure out better routes and find out where the police are and so on. Those are all things that you can do, but each one of those things actually does an incentive to a particular part of this thing, and it affects the whole only accidentally. That's the same way that we do things on the internet. Usually when you want to cajole a donkey, right, you've got a carrot and a stick, and so you beat the donkey and then you tease it with the stick, and that's how you get the donkey to go along. And on the internet, there's no stick, there's only carrots. So what you got to do is give people positive incentives to do the right thing, or they won't do it. And the difficulty here, of course, is that this is very difficult to create these new instruments of citizen action that Ralph Nader wanted to do, because the way you do that very often is with fines. The internet, there's no question, right? It's becoming central to life and business and so on, the way automotive culture did to North America. The difference is that the structure of the internet makes it very, very different from the automotive world, because in the automotive world, the roads were public. And so if you wanted access to the roads, what you had to do was pass certain rules. And if you didn't pass those rules, then you didn't get onto the roads. Your cars couldn't be sold, so they were useless. The internet is not like that, because almost all of the infrastructure is privately owned. So it's very, very hard to regulate exactly what you're going to do in it. Your network, your rules. And also, of course, the network has this property that there could be things underneath there that are structured just like the internet, right? If I'm on, I don't know, level 3's internet, if I'm on their network, of course, I've got stuff underneath that because they're a carrier. And so there's another network underneath that that looks the same and so on. So it's very, very difficult to do these things. The other thing, of course, is that the internet doesn't really work on, I put this in just because I could. The internet really doesn't work on a national boundary. It's not designed to do that. It's designed for shortest topological path. And so geography doesn't enter into it. Remember my earlier point about how the Internet of Things tends to be things that are geographically bound. So we don't have a geographically bound thing here. And it's designed not to do that. In fact, and this is a key thing, it can't be geographically bound because even though the endpoints in any internet operation are geographically bound, the path between them cannot be predetermined. And if it is, we lose the fundamental thing about the internet. We built this system, or this reliable system, out of unreliable parts. And we built it that way depending on this idea that you could just route around the damage if you had to. That means you can't predetermine what the path is, and if you regulated it such that you could predetermine it, you would wreck the thing you were trying to regulate and keep available to everyone. So either regulation won't be effective because it won't be able to do the kinds of things that people want, because the clever people are going to go around the regulations, or else the regulations will destroy the goose that laid the golden egg. Those are pretty much the options. There is another thing about this, of course, and that is that the speed of change on the internet has been enormous. You don't get a thing that is this sophisticated in less than 50 years without an awful lot of very fast change. And there are many things that bodies like the one depicted on this screen are good for, but really fast reaction to rapid change is not among them. National regulatory authorities typically work on the order of years, and if you try to do that with 192 other countries' national regulatory authorities, things only go slower. So there is this additional problem. And that makes me think that the only thing that we can hope for is that network operators and Internet of Things device manufacturers figure out how to address the public concerns themselves and do this reliably, do this to the satisfaction of the public. In many ways, I'm trying to evaluate or imagine the alternative history, the one that Ralph Nader complained did not happen. What he complained was that General Motors was unwilling to invest in the cars in order to make them safer, in order to make them more reliable, and in order to make them cheaper and more efficient to operate and less polluting and so on. At the time, of course, the automotive industry said that consumers weren't interested in this. This is to repeat Fred's earlier point, nobody will pay for security. What's interesting to me about that is that they claimed that nobody was willing to pay for security, and yet people were willing to go to the government and get them to become directly involved in automotive design, which seems like a really indirect way to get the result that you wanted. If you wanted to pay for security, why didn't you just do it? So the question then is how we're going to set up the incentives, how we're going to get the right carrots in order to get all these vendors to do the right thing. I don't actually know, but I see two alternatives. Alternative one is that large-scale government regulation of ISP operations is inevitable, and it's just the cost of the success. And what we do is we get an internet that gradually changes its innovative path. And that is, in fact, what happened in the automotive industry, right? There were certain things that changed enormously, very, very quickly over the first 50 years of automobiles, and then those things changed more slowly, although there were big advances in certain areas. The other possibility, of course, is that the people who are whose practices most directly impinge on the end users, they're the ones who are going to find the cooperative regime, and then we won't need direct regulation. I don't know how we get to the second of these. I wish I did, and I would be very, very interested in groups like the Internet Society of Hong Kong and so on coming up with that, because we have entered a roundabout and we don't know which way we're going to go. We got to get out of this, though, because we can't just keep going around in a circle. The future is being made today, and it's based on our choices. We have to make this choice. Those of us who are involved on the policy side, those of us who are involved on the technical side, everybody, we need to make those. The internet will almost certainly develop along the lines that I said before. It's going to continue in its evolutionary path. But it means that we've got this system that becomes more critical, and yet there's an awful lot of incentive to build stuff that is closed, that is proprietary, that is controlled by a few large ventures, that is contrary to the traditions of the internet. And if we allow that to happen, we will build this future in which we've got these more critical systems that are actually controlled tightly by a few people. If we do that, the internet of the future in 10 or 20 years will just be a packet switched substrate over which we've got these closed systems that are running. It won't be the internet at all. I mean, it will be interesting, but we shouldn't call it the internet. It'll be an enclosed system, just like this field is. You can tell it's enclosed because it's a fence. This used to be a commons. Excuse me, I kind of frog in my throat there. There are several pieces of this that I think we need to pay attention to. We have to make sure that in our systems design and in our deployments, in our representations to legislatures, we are always mindful that the internet depends on voluntary interconnection. It's mostly without prior or formal agreements, right? Most of the peering still happens by handshake. And there's not this contractual or regulatory oversight of the entire system. All of these three items are essential properties of what we call the internet today. And if we build something different, then we shouldn't call it the internet. I think that we have this opportunity, both because of organizations like ISOCHK, chapters here in Hong Kong, and because of our individual actions. We have this opportunity now to influence the way that this stuff develops. And so what I want to do is have this happy future in which we can say, we can connect all of our houses, we can connect all of our things, and we can still leap for joy that we've built ourselves an open internet. I thank you very much for your attention today.
We have a floor question from the front.
Thanks very much. Very provocative talk. I have one question is, what are your thoughts about the problem of bad regulation? So regulation that bans encryption, requires backdoors, labels dissent as terrorism, it increases liability of intermediaries for what's running through their networks. What do we do about bad regulation?
So I am but a humble engineer, as one of my bosses used to say, and so I'm not always qualified to speak about what is a good or bad regulation. What I do know is that the way that the network was successful, the way that we got something that grew and supported all of this stuff that we have and so on, was that we did not put those kinds of things in the middle, and we did not put those kinds of restrictions on innovation. So the ISOCHK slogan for this, right, is permissionless innovation at the edge. And so we've got three key things there: permissionless, innovation, and at the edge. And most of what you describe as bad regulation is usually an attack on one of these three principles, right? It's either an attack on the permission, it's an attack on innovation, or it's an attack on where it has to happen. And I think that whether you take this to be a moral position about the freedom of people to do these various things, because you think that's good, or you take it to be a political position, that is, you're trying to maintain people's freedom for political expression, or whether you take the engineering position that I don't care what the technology is being used for, but I want to ensure that it continues to grow in this healthy way. Those three principles remain critical no matter which of those you take. And so I don't have to worry about good or bad regulation to say, well, I can see that anything that attacks any of those things, it's automatically bad for the internet one way or the other.
Another question from the front.
You mentioned about incentive, again, not making incentive errors. My question is, what role do you see for consumer education in educating the buyers, i.e. the buy side? And what relationship, or do you see any special role for example, China, which will have a role in making the actual Internet of Things? How can we make this safer for everyone?
So I think this is a really good question, and you know, I've struggled with this a little bit because the danger, of course, is that what you're going to do is introduce a regulatory regime that tries to control stuff. But the way that you know that you've got, for instance, a light bulb that you can plug into the light socket in your house is that it's been tested. It's got the little brand on the outside, right? It's got the little UL or CSA, or I don't know what else. You know, there's a little CE. There's a lot of different. I mean, there are a lot of different ones, and that's a problem. That there are so many different ones, because it would be nice if, like, everybody in the world could, you know, rely on the same sort of logo and understand, hey, wait, if it's got one of these, I'm safe. But you know, maybe the multiplicity is a good thing because it allows them to remain in competition with one another and learn some things from one another, and, you know, there's some innovation there. So I'm of two minds about it. The key thing, though, is that you know when you buy these things, hey, wait a minute, if I want to get one of these ones with the stamp on it, and I don't want to get one of the ones that doesn't have the stamp on it. Now, most of those laboratories actually started as private initiatives. The Underwriters Laboratories, for instance, contains the clue of its origin. Underwriters is the old-fashioned name for insurance people. They were writing insurance on these things, and they started to notice that every time they wrote a home insurance policy, the house burned down because of some electrical problem. And so they said, well, we're going to stop having electrical problems. And so they started this laboratory that tested stuff, and then they put into insurance policies the requirement that if the house burned down without your, because of an appliance that wasn't underwritten by this Underwriters Laboratory, well, then you're on your own, Bubba. And that was the way that they solved this, because they set up the incentives the right way. It seems to me that in many ways that's a much stronger way of solving this kind of problem than having the UN agreement on safe networking, which seems to me to be the kind of thing that is going to lag always by about 5 years. And so it would be much safer to have people have this incentive to get these things. What this means, of course, is that those of us in the networking industry are going to have to figure out how to start producing those reputation systems. Interestingly, we have some experience with this, right? So email, there's a good side and a bad side to this story, angels and devils once again. The good side about this is that we solved the email problem mostly without legislation. Most of the legislation is completely ineffective, and the way we solved most of the spam problem was with email blacklists. And so your anti-spam people subscribe to these email blacklists, and they subscribe, they evaluate your email on the way through to see whether it corresponds with this. And the blacklists, of course, are privately maintained, and they're reputation systems that are feedback mechanisms from the email providers. The downside to this is that part of the reason it works so effectively is because there is, at the outside, 25 people in the world who are important email senders now, and everybody else is in the noise. So what this did was it kind of eliminated the market for email providers and centralized a large number of things. There is this pattern going on the internet right now where we're making the people who provide infrastructure very, very large. And without saying anything that would get me in big trouble with my marketing department, I can say that, you saw there was an attack in the United States on a certain company's DNS infrastructure, and that affected a large number of people. Well, it affected a large number of people partly because a large number of people are using that DNS provider. And that remains true for all of these kinds of infrastructure systems that we're centralizing. So to the extent we're centralizing things on the internet, we may be creating problems for ourselves. To be fair to that particular vendor, it has been saying for years that maybe people should try to use more than one vendor for their infrastructure choices, because that way, if any one thing, if a bad day happens to anybody, it doesn't happen to you too.
Any more questions? Yes, we have one from the left.
Speaking of internet infrastructure of the future, do you see the future of IoT infrastructure remains to be IP and DNS based, or a proprietary at the edge, or replaced by telecommunication networks, or a mix?
I think this is a great question. First of all, I want to say that if I actually knew this, I would go out and invest, or more likely short, some stock. So don't go to the bank on my predictions here. But I would say one thing that we really see, and this is hinted at in one of those principles that I was mentioning earlier. One of the things that we see an awful lot on the internet is that stuff is built on top of the things that are already deployed. And whether we like the DNS or don't, whether we like IP or don't, for that matter, whether we like IPv4 or don't, the fact is that that is massively deployed now. And so if you want to deploy something radically different from that, or something maybe that doesn't build on top of it, so maybe we get an overlay naming system, for instance, but that depends on the DNS underneath it, you need to have a story by which all of that stuff gets replaced and all of the necessary infrastructure gets built. That's the difficulty that I have whenever I hear somebody saying, for instance, that they want to replace the DNS. I would like to replace the DNS too, even though I make my living from it, because it's got a lot of design decisions in it that are just crazy. I mean, you can almost see this in some of the things, right? Like the variable length pieces. I'm going to geek out here for a moment. The variable length pieces of a DNS message are not all at the end of the message, right? All the fixed length things don't sit at the front of the message. So if you do any computer programming, you know it's way easier if you just have all the fixed length things at the beginning and you pick them all off one at a time and then deal with the variable length things later. No. In the DNS messages, there's like a fixed length header, and then the first thing you get is a variable length thing followed immediately by a fixed length value. That was crazy, and it just drives us all nuts. But it's the thing we got deployed. So that tells me that there's an enormous pressure to deploy these things over top of the infrastructure that we've already got, because even in the internet we've got these cases. On the other hand, the use pattern of this stuff tells very much against pushing things out to the edge. So what I'm nervous about is the potential that what we'll do is build completely proprietary silos on top of this this switched packet system that is the internet, and it's just really a carrier. It's a new kind of substrate, and over top of that run these completely different so-called ecosystems that talk to one another. Have you ever noticed that these are always called ecosystems? Have you ever been in an ecosystem that is completely managed from the top down? No, that's called a park. It's not an ecosystem. I'm sorry, it's a little bear in mind. So these systems, there's a lot of commercial pressure to close them and to try to lock you in. And you see this over and over again, right? Where I think Vint Cerf's speech was talking about this. You don't want to have like 100 different apps when you go into your house in order to manage the 100 different kinds of devices that you've got in there. But that's what everybody who seems to deploy them wants you to do, because they want you to buy more of their kinds of devices and hook them all up together. And of course, the consumer desires here are not aligned with that at all, because like the cheapness or the expense of this thing is going to be wrong. But the other thing about it, of course, is that sometimes you just don't like the way one of these things works. I've noticed recently that my phone, the people who manufacture my phone, and I won't tell you which kind, they have made a bunch of design decisions in the latest generation of their phone that drive me out of my mind. But I can't move now because I've got, like all of the stuff that I built around it, and it just drives me out of my mind to know that I've done that. So I don't know how this tussle is going to work out. This is really a tussle that's going to have to work out in the market. I'm hoping, though, that as consumers, what we'll do is we'll say, no, we're not buying your stupid proprietary garbage because it's too dangerous. I'm not putting into my house, like it's bad enough with my smartphone, right? I replace it every 18 months. The wall switches in my house, effectively I never change them. If I'm gonna be like, nailed to somebody's so-called ecosystem for the next 25 or 30 years, I wanna be pretty sure that I can, buy them from a different vendor.
Thank you, Andrew. And please stay on stage. May I now invite Mr. Song to present a souvenir to Andrew as a token of appreciation. Andrew and Mr. Sung, please be seated. Well, it's 12:30 and we are going to have our lunch break. Well, before we have our lunch break, there are some little friendly reminders that I would like to notice. First one will be, there will be 3 more keynote sessions and 2 plenary sessions after lunch and following by. We will still be staying at this function room as well, so please stay and don't miss any of these sessions. And then we will have afternoon breaks such as around 3-ish to 3:20 p.m. also in this function room. And the third little reminder will be the shuttle bus. It will be still provided and available at 6 p.m. and 6:15 p.m., which is at the same spot where you got off this morning. And the last one would be the online feedback form. Please bear in mind to take the online feedback form from us afterwards. The hyperlink will be announced via email later on. We welcome all of your feedbacks, and we will be more than grateful to hear from you again. Thank you, and enjoy your lunch.
Which has its pros and cons, iOS and the Apple Store.
I missed your presentation. Do you have the, the elevator base?
Yeah.
Would you like to talk to? Yeah, I'll be there.
I'm running this thing called ranking digital rights. Yeah. We actually put out.
No longer.
Well, you know, you gotta know. But we still might want to. Start with questions. Yeah, so that's really.
Well, now that travel.
That's impossible. So yeah, so about the activity Twitter, sorry, we were late. Yeah, we were very lucky to get so the places where that light pressure we again were very close to our
Sorry about running out on started walking.
Whatever that means.
There's an energy there. But in a fun way. So, yeah, how was Joburg? How was that thing? That was good. You going to be on solo? I'm going to go live. Yeah, that's right. A few hours. Yeah. Well, I mean,
that is the difficulty that sometimes so and one of the problems that we always have those days things like now but by insurance well that is I mean basically what happens is they do but the time you want it is very high so there's this idea of screen where instead of having query, query Facebook and you use this for like so the funny thing is that works on Facebook separators virtually you got the money. And then well, you know, their entire market were high-speed traders. All they wanted were people who were looking for decision making on additional and control in the second and so they don't want anything to do with that. Oh yeah, they'll pay it. Just like one of Wall Street. Yeah, it was. I think. Oh, you know, all the interesting research. This is this long thing about conjunction that they were writing. No, this is actually so. So I would love to get some more questions like this. Still right. Well, so I will say that when I started as a chair, I really thought that I had an opportunity when I started, it was supposed to be picked by that. And it's just like expanded in the world. I've been waiting since 1980. Yeah. It's time, you know, all the little schools in America, but I'm still glad about giving the school. Not the lawsuit. But that last week, before that happened, I didn't know what that was. There was a real possibility, which is what they had passed in order to and crews because he said that like they were going to have a measure. Came out of the well, it'd be another 8 years because I kept saying to people, you know, they were like, oh, deadline and so on. I was like, the only time it's ever happened is in the last year of late stuff. Like, somebody who's in his second term, that's the only time. Nobody well, I mean, the climate is it's slightly warmer in Toronto because there's all that, you know, urban heat. There's no way to have a bubble heat coming your way, right? No urban heat in Hampshire.
Seriously. So yes, as long as you externalize the costs of that infrastructure, it's not going back and no money to this one. The price goes up for everyone. You don't externalize your security costs.
Well, I think that if somebody takes a good notice and says, here's how